The wrench slipped from my oil-stained fingers, clattering against the concrete floor of my garage with a sound sharp as a gunshot. The echo bounced off the cinder-block walls, mingling with the faint hum of cicadas outside in the Texas heat. I barely registered the noise. My mind snagged on the voice crackling through the phone pressed against my ear. "Mr. Fox, I'm afraid I have tragic news about your son, Chad, Doctor," Ellison said, his tone heavy with practiced sympathy. "He suffered a massive heart attack this morning at his office. He was found at his desk by his secretary. The paramedics did everything they could, but he was already gone." The words didn't land right. They bounced around my skull, refusing to settle. Chad, heart attack. My boy, only 42. I slid down the garage wall, the rough concrete catching on my worn work shirt, until I hit the floor. The cold seeped through the fabric, grounding me in a moment that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. "Sir, are you still there?" the doctor asked. "I'm here," I said, my voice hollow, like it was coming from the other side of the garage. "When did this happen?" "Around 11 this morning. We'll need someone to make arrangements. Is there family we should contact?" "His wife, Joyce." The name tasted bitter, like stale coffee left too long on the burner. "I'll call her." I hung up, the phone heavy in my hand. The garage was quiet now, save for the faint drip of oil from the old Ford pickup I'd been working on. The air carried the familiar scent of motor oil and Texas dust, a smell that had defined my life for 36 years. I'd spent decades under hoods like this one, fixing what was broken, making things run again. But this I couldn't fix. My eyes drifted to the workbench, where a framed photo sat next to a coffee can full of screws. Chad, at 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a bass he'd caught at Lake Meredith. That grin could have lit up the whole garage. He'd been so proud of that fish, barely bigger than his hand, waving it around like a trophy. I could still hear his voice, high and excited, calling out, "Dad, look!" I did it. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaking like they'd forgotten how to hold me up. The afternoon sun poured through the open garage door, painting the floor in harsh light. Everything looked the same as it had this morning. Tools scattered across the bench, oil stains mapping out years of repairs. But nothing felt the same. My world had cracked open, and I was still trying to understand the shape of the pieces. I dialed Joyce's number, my fingers clumsy on the cracked screen of my phone. It went straight to voicemail. "You've reached Joyce Fox. I'm unable to take your call right now, but please leave a detailed message and I'll return it at my earliest convenience." Her voice was cold, polished, like she was reading a script for a corporate ad. Not family. Never family. "Joyce, it's Otis," I said, my throat tight. "I just heard about Chad. Please call me back as soon as you get this. We need to talk about arrangements." 20 minutes later, I tried again. Same result. An hour after that, still nothing. By the 6th attempt, my hands were trembling with a mix of grief and frustration. "Joyce, this is the 6th time I've called," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I know you're there. I know we don't get along, but this isn't about us anymore. Please, just call me back." The phone slipped from my hand, bouncing off the concrete with a crack. The battery cover popped off, skittering under the workbench. I didn't bother picking it up. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like I was underwater. Chad's photo stared back at me, his grin frozen in time. Back when he was my boy, before business school, before California, before Joyce, before the distance between us grew like weeds in a neglected garden. I retrieved the phone, snapping it back together. The screen had a new crack running diagonally across it, but it still worked. Damaged, but functional, like everything else in my life. I couldn't sit here waiting for Joyce to decide I was worth her time. Chad was my son, my only child. Margaret and I had waited so long for him, prayed for him through years of heartbreak. When he finally came, he was our miracle, our light. I couldn't let Joyce erase that. I pulled an old canvas duffel bag from the closet, the same one I'd used when I drove Chad to college 2 decades ago. 3 changes of clothes, my shaving kit, the photo of Chad. My hands moved on autopilot, packing while my mind tried to make sense of a world without my boy. No more Sunday phone calls where Chad would talk about his latest real estate deal, his voice bright with the same excitement he'd had for that fish. No more Christmas cards with photos of him standing in front of houses that cost more than I'd ever earn. No more chances to bridge the gap that had grown between us. The drive to Los Angeles would take 12 hours if I pushed it. I'd made the trip once before when Chad graduated from business school. Back then, Joyce had still pretended to tolerate me, her smiles tight but polite. That was before she decided I didn't fit into their polished, expensive life. I folded Chad's photo carefully between 2 shirts. The glass frame cracked in one corner from a long-ago drop. I'd meant to fix it, but like so many things, I'd never gotten around to it. Now, the regret stung sharper than the grief. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the garage. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, peered through her kitchen window as I loaded the duffel into my truck. Her face creased with concern, but I didn't stop to explain. How do you tell someone your world just collapsed? I waved, climbed into the cab, and started the engine. Tomorrow, I'd lock up the garage and drive west toward a son I'd never see again and a daughter-in-law who wished I didn't exist. But tonight, I sat on the workbench, staring at that photo, and cried for the boy who'd been so proud of his fish. The truck door slammed shut as the first streaks of sunrise painted the Texas sky pink. I'd spent the night packing and repacking, trying to keep my hands busy while my mind spun in circles. The highway stretched ahead like a ribbon I didn't want to follow. Interstate 40 would carry me through New Mexico, Arizona, and into California. 12 hours of driving with nothing but my thoughts and the ghosts of conversations I'd never have with Chad again. The miles blurred together, the desert landscape unfolding in shades of red and gold. The radio droned with traffic reports and weather updates for a world that kept moving despite my loss. I reached for the dial, then stopped. Silence felt more honest, a fitting companion for the weight in my chest. Somewhere outside Albuquerque, a memory hit me like a sudden storm. Chad at 8, standing in our backyard with a baseball glove too big for his hands. Margaret was behind us, hanging laundry on the line, her soft humming weaving through the air. "Dad, when will I be as big as you?" he'd asked, squinting up at me in the afternoon light. "Hold the ball with both hands, son," I'd said, kneeling to adjust his grip. "You'll get there. Just keep your eye on the ball no matter how fast it comes." He'd nodded with the seriousness only a child can muster, his small face set with determination. We'd toss that ball back and forth for an hour, Margaret's sheets flapping like white flags in the breeze. The memory was so vivid I could smell the fresh-cut grass, feel the warmth of the sun on my neck. I had to pull over at a rest stop, gripping the steering wheel as tears blurred the horizon. When had we stopped playing catch? When had he gotten too busy for his old man? "Long drive ahead, Grandpa," a young gas station attendant said as I filled up the truck. He couldn't have been more than 20, with kind eyes that reminded me of Chad at that age. "Going to see my son," I said before I could stop myself. Though I guess I'm too late for that. His expression softened, understanding without needing details. "Sorry for your loss, sir. Drive safe." Back on the road, another memory found me. Chad at 25, calling from California to tell me about his first big real estate deal. His voice had crackled with excitement, the same way it used to when he'd mastered a new pitch. Dad, I just closed a $2 million property in Beverly Hills, he'd said. I'd been in the garage, elbow deep in a neighbor's transmission, grease smudged across my forehead. That's more money than I'll see in a lifetime, boy, I'd said, half laughing. Maybe you should come visit. See what I've built out here? But I never had. There was always another car to fix, another excuse to stay in Amarillo where life made sense, where I didn't have to navigate wine menus or Joyce's fancy friends. The landscape shifted as I drove west. Texas plains gave way to New Mexico desert, then Arizona mountains. Each mile took me further from the world I knew and closer to the one Chad had chosen, a world where I'd always felt like an outsider. By evening, Los Angeles sprawled before me, a glittering circuit board of lights. The freeway signs pointed toward Beverly Hills, a place that existed in a different universe from my garage. My truck felt small, dwarfed by luxury cars that flowed around me like schools of expensive fish. Chad's neighborhood was a maze of manicured lawns and houses that looked more like museums than homes. Palm trees lined the streets, their fronds rustling in a breeze that carried the scent of money and ambition. I pulled up to the address, a mansion behind iron gates that looked like they belonged on a castle. Through the bars, I could see a circular driveway with a fountain, water shimmering in the fading light. This was where my son had lived, where he'd built his life, a life I'd barely been part of. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, worn work shirt, stubble from a sleepless night, eyes red with grief and exhaustion. Not exactly Beverly Hills material, but I was here. I took a deep breath and stepped out, the truck's engine ticking as it cooled. The gate's intercom buzzed like an angry wasp as I pressed the button. "What do you want?" Joyce's voice crackled through, sharp enough to cut. "Joyce, it's Otis!" I drove from Texas. We need to talk about Chad's silence stretched, taut as a wire. I could picture her in some pristine room, calculating whether I was worth her time. "What are you doing here, Otis?" "I came because of Chad. We need to discuss funeral arrangements. I can handle everything myself." "You should go back to Texas." The gate stayed closed, the mansion's lights glowing like a fortress. "I know we don't get along, but this isn't the time for that," I said, keeping my voice steady, like I was calming an angry customer. "He was my son, too." Another pause. Then the gate swung open with mechanical precision. "Fine, but wipe your boots before you come in." I parked my dusty truck next to a Mercedes that probably cost more than my house. The contrast was almost comical, like a stray dog at a pedigree show. I removed my baseball cap, ran a hand through my gray hair, and walked to the front door. Joyce met me there, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine despite her husband's death. Her black dress was designer, her makeup flawless, not a hair out of place. She eyed me up and down, her lip curling slightly. "You look terrible," she said. "It's been a long day." She turned and walked inside, her heels clicking on marble floors that stretched toward a ceiling high enough to echo. I followed, trying not to gawk at the chandeliers and artwork that belonged in a gallery. Everything was white and gold, pristine, like a hotel lobby designed to intimidate. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a living room the size of my house. The furniture looked untouched, arranged around a marble coffee table that gleamed under the lights. I sat on a couch that felt too delicate for my weight, my work boots absurd against the Persian rug. "I've already started making arrangements," Joyce said, standing to maintain her high ground. "The funeral home, the service, everything, it's under control." "What about the burial?" I asked. "Chad used to visit his mother's grave at Rose Hill Cemetery when he was young." "Maybe. He'll be cremated," she interrupted, her tone flat. "It's more practical." "There's nothing for you to do here, Otis. I appreciate you coming, but I can handle it." When's the service? Friday. Very small, very private, just a few close friends. The message was clear. I wasn't invited. Joyce, I just want to say goodbye to my boy. Something flickered in her expression, not warmth, but maybe a grudging acknowledgement. Fine. Friday at 2 o'clock, Sunset Memorial Chapel on Wilshire Boulevard. She sat across from me, perched on the edge of a chair like she might bolt. But this doesn't change anything between us. I never expected it to. We sat in silence, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Somewhere out there, people were living normal lives, while I was an intruder in my son's world. I should find a motel, I said, standing. I'll come by tomorrow if there's anything to discuss. Joyce walked me to the door, keeping her distance. At the threshold, she paused. You know, Otis, Chad left quite an estate. I'll be taking care of all his business interests. There's a lot to manage. Her words sounded like a warning, staking her claim. I nodded and stepped outside, feeling her eyes on me until the gate closed behind me. Driving away, I caught a glimpse of the mansion in my rearview mirror, lit up like a cruise ship in the dark. Chad had walked those floors, looked out those windows, built this life. And somehow, there hadn't been room for me. The Desert Inn Motel's neon sign flickered like a dying pulse as I pulled into its cracked parking lot. The place was a relic, peeling paint, weeds pushing through asphalt, a far cry from Joyce's mansion. But it fit my pension, and no one here would care about my dusty boots. Room 12 smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap disinfectant. The bedspread faded from decades of use. The air conditioner wheezed, struggling against the LA heat. I sat on the bed, the springs creaking under me, and pulled 2 photos from my wallet. Margaret at 25, radiant in her wedding dress, her smile full of hope. Next to it, Chad at his wedding 2 years ago, nervous but happy, while Joyce posed like a queen. That wedding should have been a warning. The memory surfaced, dark and heavy. A spring afternoon in Beverly Hills. White chairs on manicured grass. I'd worn my only suit, the one I'd buried Margaret in, and felt every thread of its cheapness among Chad's new crowd. You sure about this, son? I'd asked during a quiet moment, watching him adjust his tie. Dad, I'm happy, he'd said, his voice earnest. For the first time since the divorce, she makes me feel young again. Across the lawn, Joyce had been posing with her model friends, all sharp cheekbones and calculated charm. One of them whispered, and Joyce's laugh rang out, sharp as broken glass. Look at his father, her friend had said, loud enough for me to hear. Chad's embarrassed by him. Joyce's smile had been cold, dismissive. What can you expect? Different worlds entirely. I'd seen how she looked at my calloused hands, my outdated suit, the way I held my glass like it might shatter. To her, I was a relic, something Chad couldn't throw away but could certainly hide. The motel phone rang, jolting me from the memory. It was past midnight. Otis, what happened? Harlan's voice cut through, steady as ever. My oldest friend still in Texas, probably sitting in his own garage with a beer. Chad's gone, I said. Heart attack. And Joyce. She's acting like I'm dirt under her shoes. I'm sorry, buddy. How you holding up? I stared at the water-stained ceiling, searching for words. She makes me feel like an intruder at my own son's funeral. Chad sounded different these past few years, Harlan. Distant. Like he was apologizing for something. Harlan's breathing was steady, letting silence do the talking. You need me to come out there? No, this is something I have to face alone. But what if I failed him? What if I let her turn him against everything we taught him? Otis Fox, you raised a good boy who became a successful man. Don't let some gold digger make you question 42 years of fatherhood. I lay in the dark after hanging up, the city's hum seeping through the thin walls. Tomorrow I'd face Joyce again, play nice for Chad's funeral, pretend we were family. Margaret's photo caught the streetlight, her smile a reminder of the strength she'd had. If she were here, she'd know how to handle Joyce with grace. But Margaret was gone, and I was alone, trying to bury my son with dignity in a world that felt foreign. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Eternal Rest Funeral Home's parking lot as I straightened my thrift store tie in the truck's rearview mirror. Thursday had been a blur of avoiding Joyce's calls and finding a decent suit. Now Friday carried the weight of finality I wasn't ready for. Inside, the air was thick with lilies and hushed voices. Joyce held court near the entrance, surrounded by women in designer black and men in tailored suits. She'd turned grief into a social event, complete with air kisses and practiced sympathy. I signed the guest book with a pen that felt too expensive for my hand and took a seat in the back, watching the performance unfold. "Such a tragedy," a woman said to Joyce. "So young." Joyce dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief, her makeup perfect. "Chad worked so hard. His heart just couldn't take the stress a businessman offered condolences." "Joyce, if you need help managing Chad's portfolio, his properties—" "You're so kind, Robert," she cut in. "I'll be handling everything personally." Personally? Like Chad's life was a business she'd inherited. I watched her work the room, accepting sympathy like tribute. Each conversation a mix of grief and networking. These people knew Chad as a name on contracts, not the boy who'd loved baseball and fishing. Then I heard her whisper to a blonde woman, Lisa, I thought. "Look at that old man over there." Chad was so ashamed of him, Lisa glanced at me, pity in her eyes. "Joyce, surely he's grieving too. He barely visited. Now he wants to play." Loving father Joyce's laugh was venomous. Chad said his father never understood his success, always made him feel guilty for improving his life. The word stung like a slap. I'd been proud of Chad, maybe too proud to say it enough. I stood, my chair creaking, and approached them. "Joyce, this is inappropriate. Today's about Chad." Her expression shifted to wounded dignity. "Of course, Otis. I'm just emotional. You understand? We all grieve differently." Lisa looked uncomfortable, caught in something ugly. The minister called everyone to sit, and I returned to my seat while Joyce took her place up front, surrounded by her entourage. "Chad Fox valued family above all else," the minister began, reading from Joyce's script. "He built a business empire and lasting relationships." I stared at the closed casket, thinking of the boy who'd asked when he'd be as big as me. Somewhere between our backyard and this marble funeral home, I'd lost him to a world that measured worth in bank accounts. The service droned on with hymns Chad never sang, readings from books he never read. Joyce's sobs were perfectly timed, her grief a performance. When it was time to pay respects, I waited until last. Alone with the casket, I whispered, "I'm proud of you, son." I should have said it more. "I love you, despite everything. I wish I'd fought harder to stay in your life." My voice broke, and I touched the polished wood, wishing it was his hand instead. Outside, the funeral procession lined up. Joyce, in her limousine, was already checking her makeup, moving past grief to whatever came next. I climbed into my truck, a cold knot in my stomach. Her eagerness to handle Chad's financial affairs felt wrong, like she knew something I didn't. The mahogany conference table in Seal Grant's office gleamed under the late afternoon sun, 42 floors above Los Angeles. Joyce sat at the head, her black dress impeccable, like she was chairing a board meeting. I'd followed the procession in my truck, feeling like an outsider at my son's funeral. Seal, silver-haired and composed, exuded the calm of someone who'd seen countless family dramas. His office, lined with law books and diplomas, screamed money and power. "Thank you for coming," Seal began, his voice practiced. "I know this has been a difficult day." Joyce smoothed her skirt, checking her reflection in the window. "Otis, you don't need to stay," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Don't expect a penny of your son's $30 million. The dismissal hit hard, but I stayed seated. "I just want to hear Chad's final wishes." "Chad's final wish was to provide for me," she snapped. "This is a formality." Seal arranged documents on the table, their gold embossing catching the light. "Let's begin the reading," he said, opening the first folder. Joyce leaned forward, her eyes bright with anticipation. "The last will and testament of Chad Michael Fox, dated January 15th, 2025, Seal read. Joyce's fingers drummed silently, her wedding ring flashing. "To my cousin Tyler Fox, I leave my collection of vintage wines, valued at approximately $15,000. To my business partner, Mark Stevens, I leave my shares in the Riverside Development Project, valued at approximately $100,000. Joyce's smile grew, each minor bequest confirming her expected triumph. Seal turned the page, his posture shifting slightly. To my beloved father, Otis Fox, I leave the majority of my estate, including all business interests, stock portfolios, and liquid assets totaling approximately $29 million. The room froze. Joyce's face drained of color, her mouth opening soundlessly. "That's impossible," she whispered. Seal continued. To my wife, Joyce Fox, I leave the Santa Monica condominium valued at approximately $800,000, along with all furnishings and personal effects. Joyce's hand flew to her chest, her breathing ragged. "This can't be right," she said, louder now. "Check the documents again." "The will was properly executed and witnessed, Mrs. Fox," Seal said calmly. "These are Chad's legal wishes." Joyce trembled, her facade cracking. I sat stunned. The number, $29 million, too vast to grasp. Why had Chad done this? We'd barely spoken in years, our calls stilted, our visits rare. Joyce's shock mirrored my own, but hers turned to fury. "This is fraud!" she shouted, standing and sweeping documents off the table. "That old man manipulated Chad when he was sick." "Joyce, I didn't know about the will," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos. "Liar!" She pointed at me, her face twisted. "You poisoned him against me." Seal stood, his calm strained. "Mrs. Fox, this will was prepared legally. There was no coercion. You think you can steal my inheritance?" Joyce clutched her purse like a shield. "I sacrificed everything for Chad, my career, my life. I played the perfect wife." "Mrs. Fox, if you wish to contest the will, that's your right," Seal said, gathering papers, "but this outburst isn't helping." "Contest it? I'll destroy it," Joyce stormed out, the door slamming behind her. The room emptied quickly, leaving me with Seal. "This might get complicated," he said quietly, reorganizing his desk. Through the window, I saw Joyce in the parking garage, already on her phone, plotting her next move. The battle lines were drawn, and I was at the center of a war I'd never wanted. 3 days later, I sat in the Desert Inn, staring at legal papers I barely understood. Seal had warned me Joyce had hired Richard Stone, a lawyer known for winning will contests through emotional manipulation. She was challenging the will, claiming I'd coerced Chad during a vulnerable time. The accusation hurt, painting me as a schemer I'd never been. Harlan arrived from Texas, his presence a balm in the cramped motel room. "Joyce made a mistake hiring Stone," he said, unpacking his suitcase. Juries don't like lawyers who manipulate. Stone's strategy was clear. Paint Chad as depressed, vulnerable, and me as a calculating father who'd preyed on his guilt. Seal countered with evidence, medical records showing Chad's mental clarity, testimony from the notary, business records proving his sharp decisions until the end. But Stone wasn't fighting facts. He was crafting a story. The court date arrived on May 20th, 2025. The Los Angeles County Superior Court's marble steps felt cold, like the cemetery where we'd left Chad. Judge Williams, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, commanded the courtroom. Stone's opening was theatrical. Otis Fox manipulated his vulnerable son to secure an inheritance he never earned. Seal's response was factual. Chad was competent. He made a deliberate choice. No evidence of undue influence exists. Joyce's testimony painted Chad as depressed, obsessed with pleasing me. Stone twisted every phone call into coercion, every expression of love into blackmail. On the stand, I admitted our distance. I didn't visit much. Joyce made it clear I wasn't welcome. "Did you ask for money?" Seal asked. "Never. I didn't know he had that much." Stone's cross-examination was brutal, but my honesty held. The notary testified Chad was clear-minded. The medical and business records backed it up. Stone's case crumbled, his closing desperate. Don't let a grieving widow be cheated by a man who abandoned his son. Judge Williams recessed until morning. Joyce cornered me in the hallway, hissing, "This isn't over, old man." I drove back to the motel, sleepless, wondering if I'd somehow influenced Chad without knowing. At dawn, Harlan brought coffee, his words steady. "You've conducted yourself with honor." In court, Judge Williams ruled, "The will is valid. No evidence of undue influence exists." Case dismissed. Joyce's composure shattered. "I'll appeal," she shouted, storming out. I felt no victory, only relief. At LAX, Harlan gripped my shoulder. Chad saw a man worth trusting with everything. The drive back to Texas was long, the miles giving me time to understand. Chad hadn't left me money because I'd manipulated him. He'd left it because I hadn't. In a world of Joyces who saw him as a bank account, I'd loved him for who he was. The inheritance was validation, a shield for my old age, proof our love had survived. Back in my garage, I stared at Chad's photo, seeing not just a proud boy, but the man who'd trusted me. "Thank you, son," I whispered. "I finally get what you were trying to say." Outside, Texas stretched under an endless sky, and for the first time, the future felt like possibility, not loss.